Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 10th of February of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with the missile attack that we saw today during the day. If you remember, a few days ago I told you that I expected that the Russians would start missile attack within the next few days, and they started this attack today. And the thing is that today the Russians were trying to get, and mainly they were attacking the energy facilities. When start talking about Kiev, the Russians attacked the power plant TETS-5 in Kiev. Then, when talking about Kharkiv, the Russians attack another power plant that located on the west from in this town. When moving to the south to, let's say, Zaporizhzhia, the Russians attacked these energy facilities that located in the north, in the central part of this town. When moving to the west, there is another power plant near Kryvyi Rog, this one. So as you can see, the Russians were mainly targeting the energy facilities. Of course, the Russians also were attacking the air defense system Ukrainian that were managed to discover yesterday during the previous night while attacking with drones. And of course, the Russians attack some kind of unknown targets that nobody knows what exactly the Russians attack. And the main thing that the Russians were trying to achieve by those attacks is to collapse the railroad movement on the territory of Ukraine. Now, this is the most important question that the Russians want to solve. And I believe that tomorrow, maybe the day after tomorrow, we're going to see more attacks. I don't think that this is the last wave or let's say not the last wave, but wave. I'm trying to say that I don't think that we're going to see some kind of a pause within the next few weeks while the Russians are able to collect more rockets and prepare before the next attack. Something tells me that we are going to see more attacks within the next few days. And the thing is that the Russians, somehow, it's the vital question for them. They need to stop, they need to collapse the railroad movement across the Ukraine. Because railroad is the most important benefit that Ukrainians have on this special military operation. With the railroad, they are able to move forces from Kharkiv to Zaporizhzhia within a day. So they are very flexible and very mobile. And of course, the Russians need to slow them down because, as we understand, the Russians are very slow while their greatest offensive operation. Yes, they're pushing, they have progress, but the progress is too slow. And the main reason why the Russians' progress is too slow is that the Ukrainians very flexible, very mobile, and they can move their forces within a day from one front line to another. Furthermore, don't forget that they have tactical reserves all over the front line that they are able to use at the first hours of any offensive operation, and then during the next 20, even 12 hours, they are able to move strategic reserves to this or that front line. So the Russians want to cut these possibilities, and they need to do this anyway. Now let's start from the north. Let's start from Kupiansk front line. Today, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes during the previous weeks or days, the Russians finally managed to clear Dvorechna and to establish 100% control over this town. Furthermore, the Russians report that they entered Gryaninkovka and that these days they are doing clearing operation. Anyway, according to the Russian sources, the Ukrainians were moved on the west bank of Oskol River. So there are no more Ukrainians in this area, maybe some kind of commandos or some kind of lost soldiers or something like this. But anyway, there are no more Ukrainians and there are no more danger from this area from Ukrainian side. The next base, the next place that the Ukrainians have bridgehead is Dvorechna. So and Dvorechna is located on the west side of Oskol River. When talking about Kupiansk, now the gray line is town by the name of Sinkovka is in the gray line, and the Russians have their position in Liman Первый. The Russians still haven't started any offensive operation like Greatest Storm of Kupiansk. I believe that within the next few days we're going to see this. Right now the Russians are trying to spot and destroy. They're trying to win in the artillery duels, in the greatest artillery duel that we have right now. The Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours they managed to The Ukrainian losses are around 70 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. The Russians got one M777 howitzer and another D-30 howitzer on Kupiansk front line. When talking about Lyman front line, there are no changes. There were very heavy clashes all over the front line. The main clashes is around this small line. You see these small like forest lines, and there is 3 lakes in this area. The Russians are calling this area as Balka-Zhuravka. So this is the natural title of this area, of this small forest along small river or something like this. One more time, Balka-Zhuravka. So there are very heavy clashes all over this area. As you can see, this area is split like in 2 parts. There are like 2 lines, one line on the Ukrainian side, this one, another line on the Russian side. So there are very heavy clashes there, and mainly I believe that the main clash is between these 2 lines or something like this. The Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukraine lost around 100 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. 1 D-20 howitzer, another Grad. Furthermore, the Ukraine lost 1 Raider and TPQ-50 in this area. But as you can see, there are no changes on the ground, just the heavy clashes and heavy artillery duels. Furthermore, the Russians reportedly destroyed 1 ammo depot in the vicinity of Kupiansk, in the town by the name of Barova. Now let's move to Bakhmut, Vuhledar. When talking about Seversk, no changes in this area. The Ukrainians are still there. There are no movements in Belogorovka, no movements in Sporne, no movements on the line between Veselaya, Razdolovka, Fedorovka. I believe that the main thing that the Russians were trying to achieve by moving or by developing their bridgehead to the north is just to secure the flanks while attacking and while developing their offensive operation in direction of Chasov Yar on the north side of Bakhmut. So let's return back to the Western sources map. There are a lot of interesting updates that we need to show on the map. When talking about the Western sources map, as you can see, there are no changes in this area. Everything as we discussed yesterday about a small cauldron or a small back in Paraskovivka, Krasnaya Gora, about the fact that Ukrainians took a decision to move their forces from this small back in direction of Berkhovka and so on. But today, somewhere at noon time, the Russian sources reported that there is, as you can see, an icon in this area in the arrow showing the line of progress. And today the Russians reported that they managed to cross this road, the road that connects Bakhmut MO3 with Slaviansk, this most important road. I believed and I thought that it will take weeks before the Russians are able to cross this big road, but as you can see, the Wagners managed to do this within just a few days. So they developed their offensive operation in this direction, and some Russian sources are saying that now, these days, these minutes maybe, there are very heavy clashes in the vicinity of Orekhovo-Vasilievka and Dubovo-Vasilievka. If you take a look at the Russian sources map, you're going to see that there is a forest, small forest. It's perfect position for the Russians to establish defense line if they are able to do this, and there is another forest on the west from this area, and some Russian sources are saying and drawing the map, the soldiers on the ground, the officers on the ground or something like this, that the Russians controls something like this, and they managed to penetrate and to develop their offensive operation like this. I'm not saying that when talking about the west part of this small bridgehead that the Russians have tanks somewhere in the west, but when talking about just regular infantry and support with artillery, I believe that this area is full of the Russians, and they're now these days, this hour, the main thing they need to do is to establish bridgehead, and maybe if they're able to establish control over Orekhovo-Vasilievka and to penetrate the Ukrainian defense orders in this area. And if the Russians are able to do this, then you're going to see that the situation for the Ukrainians in this area will be completely is a disaster, because as you can see, Orekhovo-Vasilievka is located right in the middle between the road MO3 and the canal on the west. The canal on the west and the road MO3 in the east. So the distance of this neck of this bottle is just 5 kilometers. So it's a perfect position to establish some kind of front line in this area and to secure the flanks while the Russians will start developing their offensive operation to the south. It's a vital question, and the Russians understand this, that the main thing they wanted to do is to encircle Bakhmut from the north, but to do this, first they need to secure their flanks, their back, and not to allow the Ukrainians to start counter-offensive operation from Sloviansk in direction of Bakhmut. To complete this story, the Russians just need to take 2 towns, Zaliznyanskaya and the town by the name of Orekhovo-Vasilievka, these 2 towns. So this is some kind of defense area, defense line. Furthermore, when we're moving further from Zhelyznyanskaya, let's say to Sakavantsety, you're going to see that there is one lake, there is another lake in this area, and don't forget that during the previous offensive or storm operation, the Russians managed to establish control over the completely newly built trenches by the Ukrainians that located right between these two lakes. So that means that the Russians have already secured flanks from the north, let's say this lake and trenches between them. I believe that the Russians won't allow the Ukrainians to penetrate this area, and now they need to take control over Zhelyznyanska and Orekhovo-Vasilievka, and they will secure this flank. And after that, we are going to see how the cauldron is boiling, and the losses and the clashes and the losses from the Ukrainian side are going to be very heavy, because this is already cauldron. Furthermore, when talking about the south, the Russians are saying that they or entered or already reached the road N32, this one. So there were no footage or video confirmation of Russians that located on the road or something like this, but the Russians are saying that they control this area and they have established physical control over the road N32 that moves from Konstantinovka to Bakhmut. Another thing about the north part, about this area, the Russians reported that they have established full fire control over the railroad. This is the railroad that Ukrainians were using during the previous weeks or months as the road to move trains in direction of Bakhmut with ammo, supply, support, armored vehicles, heavy armored vehicles. And from now on, they are no longer able to use this railroad. The only possible way, we can't even say that this road is secure, is the road that moves from the town by the name of Canal in direction of Bakhmut. This one. This road is already under fire control. Anyway, this road is under fire control. Of course, don't forget about the number of local roads between Bogdanovka, these roads, so the Ukrainians still have possibility to use these roads. There is a winter right now, maybe sometimes the weather allows to use these ways as well, but as you can see, there are a lot of water reservoirs, a lot of rivers, canals, so it's also not the best solution. This is the only best solution for the Ukrainians. But as you know, the Ukrainians still haven't took a decision to step back from Bakhmut, to leave this town. So for now, they still planning to fight and to not even to hold this town. The Ukrainians are not planning to hold Bakhmut. The only thing that Ukrainians are planning to do is to hold as long as possible the Russians in this area, and of course to reduce as much as possible their army. Okay, now let's talk one more time about this bridgehead. The Russians are attacked storming Orekhovo-Vasilievka. They will try to attack Grigorievka because they need to get the canal from the west, and of course Dubovo-Vasilievka, this town as well. So they will try to develop their bridgehead in this area as follows within the next few days. So this one, this, down to the river. Berkhovka, I believe that still will be under for some time will stay under Ukrainians. So this is the thing that the Russians need to develop with them. Maybe if they are able to do this by the end of this weekend, it will be the best thing for them. But I'm not sure. Maybe by the middle of the next week they will be able to achieve. And after that, I believe that we can start counting days before everything will be solved in Russian favor. But anyway, there are still very heavy clashes. Very interesting updates about the head of Wagner. Today, this week, the Wagners reported that they stopped recruiting process in the prisons. I don't know why they did this. Maybe they have a lot of prisoners, a lot of manpower for many months of clashes, because you need to understand that they need to be trained, they need to be trained, they need to be equipped, they need to be sent, and furthermore, they need to have front lines to have their offensive or defense operations. And furthermore, the Russians understand and they know that the contract they signed with the prisoners is just a half-month contract. So that means that by the end of these contracts, these prisoners will be released, and so that's why I believe they just maybe don't want to waste the manpower, because if a person is released according to the law, the Russians and Wagners are no longer able to force this person to join Russian army or something like this. So I believe that they have reserves, they have resource of prisoners, and they just need to work this resource out, and after that maybe as a part of the next stage of special military operation they will start another recruiting process and something like this. But for now they have enough of resources. Furthermore, today the head of Wagner Prigozhin were interviewed by some press reporters, and he was asked a lot of questions and he gave his own understanding of special military operation, and he was asked when he believes the special military operation is going to be finished by the Russians or by the Ukrainians, and he told and he gave at least 3 answers to this question. The first one was that everything depends on the plans that the Russians want to achieve as a result of this operation. He told us that if the Russians are planning just to get this Dnipro River and to establish like the front line along the Dnipro River, then he said that the Russians need up to 3 years. If we're talking about the current dynamic of current clashes, about current progress, the Russians need not around 3 years to get Dnipro River. Furthermore, then he said that if the Russians are planning or wants just to return control over Donetsk and Lugansk regions, then the Russians need around 1.5 years. So not even this year, but maybe in the middle of the next year, the Russians will be able to take control over entire Donetsk area. There are Slaviansk, Kramatorsk clashes, Konstantinovka, New York, Toretsk agglomeration. There is a Vuhledar story, Velika Novoselovka, Avdiivka, Kurakhova. Maybe he's right, but anyway, this is too long, I believe. Maybe that was some kind of speculation, just to, I don't know what purpose he was. But anyway, this is what he said, so I'm trying to give you his understanding, the head of Wagner's, about the conflict and about the timings of special military operation. When talking about Donetsk front line, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost around 125 soldiers, 10 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems, another Grad, another D-30. Furthermore, the Russians attack 93rd headquarters of 93rd Mechanized Brigade inside of Artyomovsk, and the Russians managed to destroy 2 ammo depots on Donetsk front line. When talking about Donetsk itself, there are still clashes on Pesky front line, but without any progress and so on. I believe that the Russians lost a lot of blood during the previous offensive operation, so I believe that now they pushed the Ukrainians as far as possible. Maybe they forced the Ukrainians to leave Nivoyska and the vicinity of this town, because as you can see, the number of of artillery attacks in Donetsk has been reduced recently, and now went to where I haven't heard for a very long time any reports about casualties among civilians, about attacking some residential area and so on. Donetsk is still under fire, but as we see, there are less updates about the casualties among civilians in this town. Now let's talk about Vuhledar. The battle for Vuhledar, according to information we have, has ended maybe a week ago or something like this. But very strange and very interesting updates from Vuhledar are coming every day, every single day. Yesterday we just discussed the published video of Russian attack in the direction of Vuhledar when the Russian convoy were destroyed. Today in the morning we got an update that when talking about Vuhledar, there are a lot of forces who take part in the process of storming Vuhledar. When talking about the deployment map, there is 155th Marine Brigade, there is 40th Marine Brigade, and there is 36th Marine Brigade. So there are a lot of forces, and all these forces have their own plans, own goals and so on. And the Russians started offensive operation, and to tell the truth, this 155th Marine Brigade, according to Russian sources, was the most successful, and they managed to achieve a lot of success in direction of Vuhledar. But the rest forces who took part in these storm process failed their mission, and they stuck like at the beginning of the entire process or something like this. And when talking about those videos of those tanks, those armored vehicles didn't belong to 155th Marine. Those forces belong to those units belongs to maybe 40th or 36th, I don't know. But today, for example, the head of DPR, Pushilin, the head of this Donetsk People Republic, reported that the Russians managed to establish real control over the south part of Vuhledar. And the thing is that we heard such updates before, and then we discovered that the Russians, when talking about south part of Vuhledar, were talking about the residential area on the east and on the south or something like this. But today he noted a very interesting thing. He reported that the Russians established control over the south part of Vuhledar. I believe that he were talking maybe about the buildings in the south. And furthermore, the Russians started evacuation process of civilians from Vuhledar in direction of Volnovakha. This Volnovakha. So that means that the Russians do have access to some area in Vuhledar, and civilians are able to use the help from the Russians, and they start evacuation to the south. Not to the north in direction of Ukraine, but to the south, because they understand that maybe in a day or two, in a week or in a month, Vuhledar will be taken and they will be able to return back to their homes or something like this. When talking about South Donetsk front line, the Russians reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost around 60 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and a lot of artillery systems. The Russians was pretty effective during the previous 24 hours of artillery duels. The Ukrainian losses are 3 M777 artillery systems, another Gvozdika, and another D-20 howitzer. Furthermore, the Ukrainian lost around 2 ammo depot inside of Vuhledar. So the stories are very interesting, very beautiful, but I believe that when talking about, let's say, Avdiivka or Pesk or any other front line, we can say that the main goal and the main objective is to reduce the Ukrainian army when talking about the Russians' goals. But when talking about Vuhledar, at least at this stage of special operation, the only possible result and the only possible success is taking of Vuhledar, but not to reduce the army. So we'll see whether the Russians are able or not to take Vuhledar within the next few days or even weeks. When talking about Zaporizhzhia, the Russians reported destroy ammo depot in this area. They managed to shut down another helicopter, and as you can see, today, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians attacked Zaporizhzhia for more than 17 times. And the Russians are saying that all those attacks were successful. I believe that the Russians attacked the Ukrainian reserves, Ukrainian maybe some kind of industrial zones, ammo depots, and so on. I believe that that attack was pretty successful. When talking about Zaporizhzhia, the Russians reported that as a result of previous 24 hours, they, as you can see, attacked Nikolaev, attacked the south of Kryvyi Rog, Zelenodolsk. They were attacking the energy facilities, and also the Russians destroyed another ammo depot in this area as well. So something very big has happened today. So let's wait a little bit more, because I believe that intensity of clashes will be increased from the Russian side, and I believe that sooner or later something very big is going to happen. So we'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.